Good afternoon, everyone. I've modified my title slightly and called it Designing Wellness, the power of public health posters in Hong Kong's post-war health transformation. And again, I want to start with a little bit of a snapshot just to give you a sense of what was happening in the 1970s. I'll actually go back a little bit after that. So on a rainy evening at the end of October in 1972, some 10,000 people gathered at Statue Square to witness the ritualistic sacrifice of a loathed public figure. Now, the victim in question wasn't human. It was actually a 30-foot rendering of Lap Sap Chong, a giant green dinosaur-like monster created to promote the recently launched Keep Hong Kong Clean campaign. The event came 10 weeks into the most intensive public health education campaign ever launched and in the territory by the British colonial government. Now, after years of struggling with a mounting rubbish and public health problem, the ambitious campaign was devised to tackle the issue top down and bottom up. The event was reported in the local media the following day with the headline, "Bang, and he's gone. 10,000 cheer as colony starts the big clean-up." So a very positive note they were starting on. So this presentation will explore the development and evolution of Hong Kong's public health poster campaigns, but focusing on two prominent mascots that really embodied the spirit of a community approach to keeping Hong Kong clean. Now, the first is Miss Ping On, who dominated hygiene and sanitation campaigns in the late 1950s and also through the 1960s, but is perhaps less well known today. And don't worry, I won't be asking if anyone remembers Miss Ping On. The second is the aforementioned egregious Lap Sap Chong, who was born in 1972 and dominated the Keep Hong Kong Clean campaign launched later that year. Now, Lap Sap Chong is still something of a cultural icon in Hong Kong today, and I'm sure many people will remember this character. Now, I'm not the first person to look at these health mascots and their impact on cleanliness of Hong Kong, but they fit into actually a larger project that I'm doing on the evolution of public health posters in post-war Hong Kong. And I think they're possibly two of the most endearing mascots that Hong Kong has ever had, and also linked to some of the most successful public health campaigns that there have been. So analysing these posters helps us to unlock or unpack multiple layers of meaning, of social and medical history, new technologies, health literacy, and also approaches to health messaging. So I'm going to argue that over time, mascots such as Miss Ping On and Lap Sap Chong were a largely effective public health messaging device. So poster campaigns and community events in the post-war period created strong civic identity and motivation for cleanliness by collectively changing social norms and knowledge, attitudes and practices, as well as instilling an unspoken network of community surveillance and intolerance of bad behaviours. So here we see the statue of Lap Sap Chong, which was ceremoniously blown up to smithereens, and they noted in the paper that he'd actually looked better before he got blown up. The government officials were all there to watch as well. So during and after the Japanese occupation, Hong Kong underwent significant physical and socio-economic changes. So the early exodus of residents and the loss of life reversed after the end of the war, and immigration overwhelmed the still damaged public facilities and services. Now, in a health context, Hong Kong was left depleted and vulnerable to multiple threats. Infectious diseases like malaria, TB, cholera, diphtheria, measles, diarrheal diseases, they all resurged. Malnutrition was also rife, and there was poor food and water safety. In addition, doctors were in short supply, and drugs, including Chinese medicines, were scarce. Medical infrastructure had also been requisitioned and damaged by the fighting, leaving surgical capacity and inpatient services lacking. Now, the reinstated British administration was aware that communicable diseases caused and spread by poor public hygiene and also environmental cleanliness was one of the biggest post-war enemies that needed to be tackled aggressively if the territory was to get back on its feet and thrive economically. A contributory factor was the makeup of the new population, which comprised a mix of battle-weary remaining residents, both Chinese and foreign, new immigrants and refugees from China, and returning and new foreigners. Now, this didn't initially make for a cohesive or community-minded population, with people focused much more on basic subsistence, accommodation. As we heard earlier, many people were living in squatter camps, for example, food, and if possible, employment. So medical services and public works improvements had also fallen, along with everything else by the wayside after decades of really quite successful hygiene and sanitation improvements. So all of this combined to really create a problematic environment for public health. Now, in 1946, the health division of the medical department had an impossibly large remit. It was responsible for all of the colony's cleanliness and anti-epidemic measures, which of course were inherently interlinked. The Urban Council that had succeeded the oft-maligned Sanitary Board was revived and resumed its pre-war sanitation duties, as well as additional roles in managing public hygiene and cleanliness, burials also, and public facilities, including the parks and the beaches. Now, in 1948, the Urban Services Department initiated a series of what were described as mini campaigns aimed at addressing the worsening hygiene and sanitation problem in Hong Kong. The first was an annual anti-litter week using radio and print media to inform residents of the event and corral the public into participating, which, if they didn't, could result in fines and even prosecutions for various offences. The approach, however, was not particularly successful at the time. The campaigns were too short-lived. They generally just lasted for a week, and they failed to capture the community's imagination or instill lasting behavioural changes. And consequently, these campaigns were scrapped in 1954, with the government declaring, quote, that publicity alone could not solve the problem, end quote. A Keep Your City Clean campaign was subsequently introduced by the Public Relations Office that was designed to target dumping of refuse and litter, spitting in public places, and also to stop poor hygiene practices, particularly, it seems, children defecating on the streets. Now, the campaign was initially targeted to Chinese residents in the most densely populated Western District on Hong Kong Island and also Sham Shui Po on the Kowloon Peninsula. But it was later expanded to other districts with the help of the community Kai Phong associations. Posters were commonly featured in the campaign's health propaganda, as we can see in this very vibrant and pretty straightforward poster, anti-spitting poster from 1960. So, consolidating the work of the Public Relations Office, the Government Information Services Department was formed in 1959, which served as a centralised resource producing a variety of publicity materials for government departments. Now, posters were obviously not a new communication technology. Forms of posters have been used actually for centuries. But their use across different health messaging themes would increase significantly from the 1950s, covering disease, drugs, hygiene and sanitation, smoking, safety, waste, chronic diseases, and much more. And of course, they're still widely used around Hong Kong today. Why? Well, they're accessible, they're affordable, and they can also be produced quickly in response to different threats or issues. And of course, in a public health context, they're also used preemptively to warn about potential health risks and promote uptake of interventions, for example, vaccination, or more recently, the use of masks. They employ multiple design elements, typography, graphics, symbolism, color, and composition to attract and hold the viewer's attention long enough to communicate their message. Now, one of the strengths of posters is that they can convey information to a large and diverse audience, different ages, education levels, and from different socioeconomic backgrounds, and they can do this quickly. Okay? So they give high visibility to health campaigns and serve as a daily reminder of their purpose and also the objectives of the producer. So they speak both to the individual as well as the community. And they were placed in targeted areas with high foot traffic, from the streets and the public housing estates to food markets and transportation hubs. The posters that were used in health messaging, they're quite different actually to commercial posters. They use different persuasive devices, and their aim is mainly to change public behaviors and promote collective responsibility. So they rely on the public to really comprehend the benefit of taking action. So for example, this poster from the late 1950s was encouraging residents to keep the home clean and in good repair to avoid disease and illness. And obviously this has greater effect if the whole community participates. Now, one of the highlights of the Keep Your City Clean campaign in the late 1950s was the introduction of Miss Ping On, a female mascot that embodied domestic and personal cleanliness, as well as promoting civic duty. However, before becoming a literal poster girl, Miss Ping On started life as an aspirational domestic goddess for the women of the post-war resettlement estates. And of course, these were constructed, as you heard earlier, to replace some of the insanitary, dangerous, and unregulated squatter camps. In October 1958, it was announced in the South China Morning Post that as part of the health education measures, a competition would be held in all the estates to find the cleanest and therefore most hygienic room. Its female resident, who of course it was presumed would be responsible, would receive the honour of being titled the local Miss Ping On. And they would also receive a cash prize of $100. So embracing the carrot approach rather than stick, the competitions proved popular and they were repeated at irregular intervals. So important events, for example, Chinese New Year, were leveraged to garner more participation and greater effort, because who wouldn't want to win some cash before the festival? So such was the success of the campaigns that the cash prizes quickly increased from to $300 initially, and then up to a mighty $500, which was really quite a considerable amount of money at the time. And there were smaller cash and ancillary prizes for the runners-up. Now, a poster campaign featuring Miss Ping On was subsequently launched by the Urban Council to bolster the competitions and reach a larger audience. And this was really aimed to target people across the rest of the territory as well. Now, it's been suggested that the inspiration for Miss Ping On for the caricature may have been taken from Mr. Therm, that you can see here on the left, who was actually a mascot for the Gas Council in the UK. But although there's a likeness, it's difficult to confirm that this is where it came from. Now, Miss Ping On was actually created by the Public Relations Office as a multi-layered pictographic character, as you can see, with the central body constructed from the Chinese characters for good health and safety. So the combination of Chinese characters with the body of the cartoon figure easily conveyed the meaning to all, and the poster campaign made good use of contemporary offset lithography techniques that were being used at the time, and produced these really vibrant public health messaging posters. Now, one thing to note is that all the Miss Ping On posters featured Chinese text. They were not bilingual at this point, which underscored that the primary audience for the campaign was the local Chinese population. Literacy, however, was quite poor among many of the new immigrants, and health literacy was even worse. So it was vital that the posters were easily understood from the graphics alone. So a consistent campaign featuring the same mascot really helped to promote key messages on personal hygiene, pest control, and home maintenance, as we can see on this series of posters. Other Miss Ping On posters targeted food hygiene, environmental cleanliness, and general domestic safety. So hence the Keep Your City Clean campaign was multifaceted, and Miss Ping On served as an important visual reference to steer residents in the larger quest to safeguard health in Hong Kong. Although the government aimed to promote cooperation among neighbours, arguably the competitive nature of the Miss Ping On campaign focused more on the individual and also placed more domestic hygiene responsibility on the female demographic. The campaign continued into the 1960s, but later in the decade, the government surprisingly concluded that, quote, relatively little lasting improvement had been achieved by the campaigns, end quote, and it was time for a change to tackle complacency and the resurgence of population growth, refuse dumping, and worsening environmental hygiene. I don't have much time to show you these, but I do have a couple of other posters. And it took a lot of effort to get these posters, I can tell you. Marcus, where are you? Marcus, my research assistant up at the back, has been a fabulous help with all of this. So the subsequent Keep Hong Kong Clean campaign, which sought to introduce a comprehensive citywide cleanup campaign after Miss Ping On, was not the first of its kind regionally either. The Japanese government sought to clean up Tokyo before hosting the Olympics in 1964. Under Prime Minister Lee, Singapore had initiated a one-month Keep Singapore Clean campaign in October 1968. Now, according to a Reuters report that was reprinted in Hong Kong's South China Morning Post, the months-long campaign in Singapore aimed to make it, quote, the cleanest and healthiest city in Southeast Asia, end quote, by initiating targeted public competitions, quote, ranging from the cleanest bus stop and post office to the cleanest police headquarters to the cleanest taxi, end quote. Imagine that in Hong Kong. Joining the regional cleanliness trend and with broader aspirations to what historian Loretta Lowe describes as hygienic modernity, the Hong Kong government formed a dedicated committee chaired by urban councillor Dr. Denny 1970 and rolled out the Keep Hong Kong Clean campaign in 1972 with the launch of our new anti-hero mascot, Lap Sap Chong, who would feature on posters and also in publicity campaigns. Costumed forms of Lap Sap Chong even brought the cartoon character to life, engaging the community in role play and reinforcing key health messages on the posters. The initial campaign was expensive and it was labour intensive, costing the government some 10 million Hong Kong dollars, but it did appear to yield some results. Unlike the earlier Miss Ping On campaign, which targeted the Chinese community, the Keep Hong Kong Clean posters used a mix of single language, English or Chinese, or were bilingual, reflecting the territory's changing demography and literacy. So the creator of Hong Kong's Keep Hong Kong Clean campaign mascot was Arthur Hacker, who was born in Wiltshire in 1932 to a brigadier father, a novelist and painter mother, Now, he came from a long line of artists, including his namesake grandfather, who was a celebrated graduate of the Royal Academy of Art in London. And he shared the same passion for art and trained in printmaking at the Royal College of Art before becoming a freelance artist and dabbling in multiple areas, including newspapers, album covers, and even pantomime scenery. Hacker arrived in Hong Kong in 1967 at the behest of the colonial government, was deployed to the Government Information Services Department as its art director. Although, in his words, when he arrived, he, quote, started with one untrained artist and a drawing board, end quote. According to Hacker, the litterbug was semi-modelled on himself. In a later interview, Hacker noted, quote, that was the thing about Lap Sap Chong you might not have noticed. He had red hair. He was a self-portrait, if you like, a red-haired devil. That's what they always used to call me, the red-haired foreign devil, end quote. Now, Hacker was fluent in Cantonese, and he would have understood the meaning of Lap Sap and Lap Sap Chong in local culture. Now, it's difficult to know when and where the term Lap Sap Chong took on more than the literal meaning of litterbugs and started to embody the antisocial behaviour of public littering. The expression seems to have been employed colloquially in different contexts, including in Singapore and at different times also. But actually, Hacker said later on that it was a very deliberate ploy and that he dispelled any strange conspiracy theories or rumours about where that Sap Chong came from. And of course, Lap Sap Chong would continue to loom large over the city's health and hygiene campaigns for a considerable time. Now, the poster campaigns were animated in public events as well, as we can see in this government yearbook photo showing protagonist Miss Supercleans symbolically putting an inflatable Lap Sap Chong into the bin. But the Miss Supercleans only ever managed a short-lived supporting role, even after recruiting real-life female ambassador. But they were very, very successful, and there were actually calls to borrow Lap Sap Chong, and the costumed character at least was sent to Seattle and also to London for the Keep Westminster Clean campaign. Now, as his recognisability grew, you started to see less of Lap Sap Chong the character, and he would appear in sort of different forms, like you can see here. So you can just see his tail, telling people to place rubbish in the bin. And on the right, I really like this poster because the woman is basically being characterised as a human Lap Sap Chong, branded by the characteristic red and green markings on her bikini. But while the litterbug would have been proud of his bad behaviour, the woman is apparently upset from being shamed by the gossiping male characters in the background. This was typical of the poster campaigns, which oscillated in tone from friendly messaging promoting civic pride to shame, warnings and fines. By 1975, the campaign was deemed a success. Tons of rubbish had been collected and disposed of. The city was reportedly demonstrably cleaner and living conditions had improved. The burden of communicable diseases had also started to decline, in part due to better personal hygiene and sanitation, but also there were parallel vaccination campaigns going on as well, and these were also promoted through posters. But funding for the Keep Hong Kong Clean campaign started to be cut, which jeopardised the progress that had been made. So despite Lap Sap Chong giving way to more specific environmental and domestic hygiene campaigns in the late 1980s and 1990s, the lovable rubbish monster had strongly resonated with the public and left an indelible mark on the city's public health campaigns. So much so that in recent years he seems to have been resurrected or reincarnated as our tap. Now, RTAC was launched in 2016 by the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department to tackle ongoing waste management concerns. And now you'll see this character all over Hong Kong, such as the poster on the right here. And you can see there's a clear resemblance between the old and new mascots. So it draws on this sort of family-friendly nature of the so-called rubbish monsters. But you might see from this poster on the right that fines are in play again. So maybe it's not quite so friendly. Just to quickly sum up, posters were a vital mass public health communication device in the post-war period. But of course, they had to overcome poor health literacy and motivation to make long-term behavioral changes, and employed multiple visual devices to achieve this. Mascots cultivated emotional attachments to the characters and heightened awareness of campaign messaging. They also reflected the social and cultural context of their times. Miss Ping-on reinforced domesticity, the female role in the home and hygiene promotion, while villainous Lap Sap Chong represented a new modernity and the challenges that came with an increasingly urban, diverse city. The campaigns also coincided with what David Phillips described as an epidemiological transition in Hong Kong: modernization, urbanization, better living conditions, sanitation and public health education translated into better general health and increased longevity. So overall, posters have played an important role in public health education and also progress in Hong Kong. So consequently, the collection of post-war public health posters that we've curated, I think, is a valuable visual archive that contributes to an important social and medical history during a transformative period in Hong Kong. So thank you very much.